For years, we have dismissed the potential for a significant move of God in the neighborhood church. And I'm going to talk with you about that today. My name is Sam. I am the co-host of Rainer on Leadership. That's the podcast that you're listening to right now. And if you're on YouTube, hello, good to see you. My father usually joins us. However, he had some plane issues. Got stuck in Dallas and could not get back in time. So I am flying solo because he is stuck on an airplane. Hope he makes it back. Last I heard, he was going to make it home. I know none of you care. And by the time you listen to this, well, that trip will have been long gone. But let's do this. Just so you know, I have written a new book, The Surprising Return of the Neighborhood Church. And I'm going to talk about that today. And I'm going to talk about why I believe that this is an unexpected comeback and one that I am quite excited about. First, because I pastor a neighborhood church. And second, because I believe that the scale of this opportunity is absolutely massive. But before we get into the content, I certainly want to thank our sponsor, California Baptist University, CBU, as we sometimes say. Great campus, great leadership, great faculty, amazing location there in Southern California. Just a wonderful place for students to go. If you have connection to students, or maybe you're listening to this and you have a child of age, then you certainly should consider California Baptist University. Eligible high school students can actually earn college credit online. So if you've got a middle schooler or a high schooler, or know a middle schooler or a high schooler, tune in, because they're offering the first class for free. You got to buy books and course materials. That's it. But first class is free. And then you get a significant discount right after the first class, which is free. You get it's $166 per credit hour, and it usually is $613 per credit hour. So every subsequent class that you take, you can get that huge discount. This program's really open to just about any high school student. They can start during any 8-week session, summer, fall, or spring, and each semester has 2 sessions. So you want to check this out. Go to calbaptist.edu/PCC. Again, calbaptist.edu/PCC. If you've got a high schooler, they need to be earning college credit, and they can earn it through California Baptist University, one of the better universities out there, and certainly one of my favorites. Thank you, California Baptist, for sponsoring this episode. Okay, let's dig into this. So we've got all these neighborhood churches, and let me just first define what I mean by a neighborhood church. A neighborhood church can be in a suburban area. It can be in an urban area. A neighborhood church can be in a small town or a small community. It can be in a big city. You find neighborhood churches all over the place. Now, in essence, what a neighborhood church is a church that's surrounded by residences. So you may have some smaller churches that are rural churches that are kind of way out in the middle of nowhere, and they may say, well, we're not exactly a neighborhood church. Fair enough. I still believe that some of these principles apply, the things that we're going to be talking about here on this episode. Then you would have large regional churches, may not quite be a megachurch, but a large regional church, usually located, at a major intersection, right off the interstate, or visible from the interstate, or visible from a big road. It's placed there strategically, usually on a large campus. Now, most of the large regional churches would not be a neighborhood church. And obviously you have mega churches, multi-site churches, and then sometimes campuses are in a neighborhood, and some campuses might be a regional location. So the point is, there's all different kinds of churches. But I think, and it's tough to categorize and it's tough to count, because we can't even count the number of churches that are in the United States. We have to estimate, and we're usually off by tens of thousands. It's like 350 to 400,000 churches in the United States. I tend to think that it's more on the higher side of that number, because we often miss smaller churches, home churches in obscure places. So it's difficult to know. But I think of any one category, I think neighborhood churches would be the largest. And if not the largest, certainly top 1, 2, or 3 categories. So a neighborhood church is very simply one that is surrounded by residences. Now, a healthy neighborhood church, this is what gets me excited. A healthy neighborhood church is woven into the fabric of the neighborhood. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, every neighborhood is different. I've lived in a few. I live in the Palma Sola neighborhood of Bradenton, Northwest Bradenton. It's got its own flavor. It's got its own vibe. When I was in high school, I lived in St. Matthews Highlands area of Louisville, Kentucky. And if you're there, you know exactly that area. The vibe of Palma Sola, very different than the vibe of the Highlands. That's okay, because every neighborhood is like a piece of fabric. It's a little different, and there are threads that make up that fabric. And each area is going to be a little different. The church should be a thread in that fabric that helps hold the community together. So that's one thing that you'll find about a neighborhood church, is that it is part of the fabric of a community, holding it together. Typically, most people in the neighborhood, even if they don't go to the church, will know about the church, or at least know about the campus. In fact, there is a church in our area. That's just what I'll say, here in the Bradenton area. They recently closed, neighborhood church. Really sad story, because it's one that I don't want to see happen. And the people of the community were quite upset that the church closed. Now, you could easily say, well, you should have gone to the church and supported the church if you didn't want it to close. Fair enough. But after it closed, people were upset because, the land sold to a developer, unfortunately, and the place where their kids learned to ride their bikes, the place where they played football, pickup football games and baseball games, that giant yard that this neighborhood church had. It wasn't a large church at all. It was a smaller church, but people used those facilities, or at least the outside of it, to play around. And now that that's gone, people are lamenting the fact that it's gone. So that's kind of what a neighborhood church is. It tends to be on the smaller side, and by smaller, 100, 200, 300 people, kind of 300, 400 max generally, although you can have a larger neighborhood church. West Bradenton, where I pastor, is a little larger neighborhood church. And it's there in the community, often buried in a neighborhood. You're not going to find it unless you know where it is. But we've seen these neighborhood churches decline, unfortunately. And there are some reasons why. One, right at the top of the list, is why any church declines. They just did not reach outward. They did not do what they were supposed to do. They did not do the work of outreach. They did not do the work of evangelism. That's why really any church declines, for the most part, is just a lack of an outward focus. We see that all the time. But there's some, geographic and sociological reasons as well. Neighborhoods, particularly that first ring of neighborhoods outside of downtowns, the last 50 years has suffered more than it has benefited. And that's beginning to change, obviously, the last, 10 or 20 years. We're seeing gentrification occur, and gentrification can be good. It's not always good, though. Displacement is a very real issue with gentrification. That being said, we're seeing a return to a lot of these neighborhoods that popped up after the post-war boom. So following World War II, our men came home and they started families. They started building homes. That was when building a home was a whole lot cheaper to do than it is now. And in building those homes, they created neighborhoods, typically just on the outskirts of downtown, and that began to sprawl outward. By the time you reach the 1970s and into the 1980s, we see the rapid growth of suburbs, and the rapid growth of the regional church, often off of those main roads that went out to the suburbs. And those larger churches got larger. It was a baby boomer phenomenon. You've heard me and my dad talk about this. Mega churches came about. There's a lot of attention on the mega churches, really from like 1980 till roughly 2010. That movement is beginning to wane. And what we're seeing is a return, particularly with the millennials, my generation, a return to a desire to go to church in your area, to go to church locally, for those who do go to church. And people are beginning to look at these neighborhood churches again. Now, does that mean that neighborhood churches are bound to grow? No. Because if you aren't hospitable, if you're not doing outreach, if you've locked up your campus, if you're not up to date, if you don't have clean facilities, particularly children's facilities, if you don't have a children's ministry, it's going to be very hard for these neighborhood churches to grow. But there is an opportunity here because the megachurch movement is waning. Something must take its place. What will that thing be? What other movement of God may take place? Well, that's God's work. And if it's a movement of God, well, we as believers should welcome it, whatever it is. But I believe that there is a big, big opportunity with the neighborhood church, which is why I wrote the book, The Surprising Return of the Neighborhood Church. A little bit of self-promotion here, but that's okay. I certainly want to thank Tyndale for publishing the book. They have been a great, great publisher. They're also a sponsor, Church Answers, and I want to thank them for that. So if you're watching on YouTube, you see what the book looks like. It's green. It's got a green cover. So you can go pick it up. There'll be a link in the show notes. I would love for you to get a copy of The Surprising Return of the Neighborhood Church. Now, okay, so that's a little bit about what the neighborhood church is. What I'd like to do, and it's what I do in the book, at least in one chapter, in a part of a chapter, I debunk some myths of the neighborhood church. So why don't we just do that for a moment? The first myth that I would like to debunk really applies to any church, and it's this myth of exponential growth. So when I was in my 20s, and that was a long time ago now, when I was in my 20s, you read the books on church growth, and this was when the missional movement was really big. But even then, even in that missional movement, the emergent church, for those of you who are alive back then, even in all of those discussions of what is missional, what is emerging, what is emergent, there was still a draw to large churches. And frankly, a lot of the more popular emergent churches got big. They became mega churches. So there's still a lot of attention on the mega church, even when I was in my 20s. But that's since waned. And what I heard and what I think has been stated for 50, 60 years now is this idea of church growth, and that churches should just grow and grow and grow and grow. Well, I like for churches to grow. I think every church should grow and try to grow. But there is a myth that you can just grow exponentially every year. You can't. Statistically, that's an impossibility. Can you go from 200 to 400, then from 400 to 800, 800 to 1600, 1600 to 3200? Yeah, you can do that. And then from 3200 to 6400, sure. But that's just not, that doubling effect, that exponential growth is just not going to happen every year. And so we need to release ourselves from that myth of exponential growth. Should your church grow? Sure, yeah. Should you expect it to grow rapidly every year? I don't think that's a fair assumption. Even statistically, that's not a fair assumption. And what happened is a lot of these churches built campuses and facilities and created programs and ministries as if the ones that were experiencing this growth, they created a program and a facility as if that growth would continue. And some of them have gotten into some serious trouble because of that. So if you are a neighborhood church, should you grow? Yeah, but let's release ourselves from the myth of this rapid exponential growth. It's just not feasible. Another myth involves parking. Now, this is one that I experienced here at West Bradenton. We have, just a little math here, we have 310 parking spots. And when I first got here, we were averaging like 2 people per car. And that means that, roughly, if we fill up every spot, that we have a little field, we have some street parking, you fill up every single spot. That's just not spots in our parking lot, striped spots. That's literally every single spot, which for some churches would be quite a parking lot. But for us, it was much smaller than we needed because our facility can hold, 1,000, 1,200. But our parking lot could only hold 600. Now, when our church was built, they built it correctly because they built it in the 60s. And in the 60s, you were having 4 and 5 people per car because families only had 1 car back then. They didn't have 2, 3, 4 cars. Everyone came to church together. So the church was not built improperly, just times changed. And so we really need a parking lot twice the size to fill our campus. Now, some of you may be experiencing that just on a smaller scale. It may not be 300 spots for you. It may be more like 50 spots, and you need 100. But here's the thing: just because your parking's limited doesn't mean that that you can't grow. This is part of the reason we have 3 services in our large space, and then one English-speaking service, or excuse me, one Spanish-speaking service in our chapel, and then we have another campus as well that we've started. So we actually have 5 services, 2 languages, 3 preachers on a Sunday morning. And is our worship space ever full? No, it can't be, because we can't park it. We can't fill it because we don't have enough spots. But when it gets about half full to 3/4 full, or even 2/3 full, it feels just fine. So, you can't let your parking lot limit your growth. You can go to 3, maybe 4 services. After that, it gets a little tough if you're preaching 4 in a row, particularly if you're the only preacher that Sunday. But you can grow past your parking lot. And another trick here is something we figured out. So we got a lot younger as a church, significantly younger, about 25, 30 years younger. About 35% of our church now is 18 and under, which means a lot of kids are coming, and those kids come with their parents. So our average per car went from about 2 to 2.6, 2.8. And now our parking problems aren't nearly as big of a deal. So one way you can solve parking problems at your church is to get younger. Because when you are an older church, you see people coming in 1s and 2s, which is fine. That's what they have to do. That's not anything against an older person who comes by themselves. They have to. But the reality is if you want to open up parking spaces, you can get younger as a church. So a couple of myths there. Another myth that I just have to mention here: small size does not mean small influence. You have 2 ways to influence as a church, really, and I'll just say they're reach and impact. Reach really involves how far, and impact involves how deep. So again, we're talking about influence here. Small churches don't mean small influence. Now, if you're a large regional church, you may do something like, we're going to bring cookies to every firefighter in the city. We're going to find, and you can have that reach. Let's say you're a giant church, 5,000 people or whatever. You can do that. We're going to have a Saturday where we go to every firefighter in the city, and every firefighter is going to get cookies from us. That's reach. Can a small church do that? It'd take quite an effort, and probably not feasible for a small church to do that. What a small church can do is impact, though. A small church can go to the fire station right down the road. Of course, you bring cookies, but you can get to know the firefighters personally and build that relationship. You may not be able to influence via reach, but you can influence via impact. And neither of those things are right or wrong, and there's times to do both. But if you're a smaller church, you don't need to compete with the large church on reach. What you can do is minister with that idea of impact in mind. So, the myth that, you can't compete with the large church, let's dismiss that. The myth, hey, we can't park our people, let's dismiss that. The myth that the largest churches have the most capable leaders, that's just not true. If you are a neighborhood church, it requires a certain kind of leadership. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're any less of a leader if you're at a smaller church. A lot of times, smaller churches have incredible leadership. The leadership just happens to be called there and has that particular calling. So I do believe, and I think we're getting beyond the stigma of the neighborhood church. I think we're getting beyond the stigma of small churches. You just don't hear it as much. I'm sure it's still out there in places. But I think that there is this grand opportunity with the neighborhood church. But what's got to change before it happens? So let's talk about this. What must change before a movement of neighborhood churches becomes mainstream? Well, I think that a lot of neighborhood churches have struggled over the years simply because they do not expect to grow. They do not anticipate growth. They do not work for growth. And a lot of churches are small for a reason. They have stayed small or even declined simply because they have made choices that have prevented their growth. They don't think outward. They don't reach into their neighborhood. There's several neighborhood churches that we've worked with where here at Church Answers, where there's 20, 30 people that go to the church and none of them live in the neighborhood, and that's hard. That is a major problem, which means that fostering and adoption are going to be a key part of this movement, because there is a point at which a neighborhood church reaches to where it's going to be especially hard for that church to dig itself out of a hole, and it's going to require the help of other churches, that's fostering, or potentially another church adopting the struggling church as typically as a campus. Now, obviously, I would love for every church to be healthy, for it to thrive, and there's this saying, and I put this in my book again, "The Surprising Return of the Neighborhood Church." That's what we're talking about. That you hear it almost said with disdain. Oh, there's a church on every street corner in that town, as if that's a bad thing. And I'm thinking, no, that's a good thing. Now, maybe those churches, I get why people say that the spirit behind that is there's a church everywhere and none of them are doing anything. Fair. But to say there's a church on every street corner with disdain, as if the locations are bad. No, those are kingdom locations. Those are incredible opportunities. Will all of these neighborhood churches get their act together? No, they won't. But what if in a small town, let's take a town of 10,000 or 20,000, 4 or 5 neighborhood churches say, you know what, we're going to do this. It would revolutionize that town. And so just because there's a church in every street corner, you know what, I look at that as a good thing, because what if those kingdom assets can be put to use again, which means that the potential scale for this comeback is huge. I mean, just think about what if 25% of neighborhood churches got healthy again, started growing, started doing outreach, started thinking about impact. Man, it would revolutionize the nation. That's why I wrote the book. Again, it's The Surprising Return of the Neighborhood Church. Link is in the show notes. It's by me, Sam Rainer, your co-host here at Rainer on Leadership. And I do appreciate you letting me talk a little bit about this. And I certainly want to thank Tyndale. They have done an incredible job for us at Church Answers. They published several of our books. Another good one that you can pick up is When the People Pray. Put a link in the show notes. That's my dad's new book. He's not here to talk about it, so we'll probably have to, bring him back on. Again, he's stuck on a plane, and have him talk about that book. But link in the show notes to his new book, When the People Pray, as well. So thank you, Tyndale, for putting these books out there. I know that the team at Tyndale has spent a lot of time and effort publishing these books. So we write them so you can read them. So please go get the book. And also, again, thank you to California Baptist University. Go check out that program that they've got for high schoolers. It's a really, really good program. You can find that at calbaptist.edu/PCC, or you can click on the link in the show notes. And all of you who listen on the podcast and watch on YouTube, thank you. We love our audience. We're very grateful to our audience. And all of you who tune in every week or binge listen, however you do it, we're glad that you're listening. Want to say thank you to all of you listeners, and we will see you on the next episode.
Hey, folks, this is a PS to our podcast. We got some exciting stuff that we want to offer you absolutely for free. Sam, when you think about predictive factors in a church's growth, if you take out demographics, what are some things that come to mind? Just two. I mean, don't give me a list of 10. Just 2 or 3 things that come to mind on predictive growth of a church.
Well, evangelism, and whether the church is doing it or not.
Bingo.
And then I will add, is it an ongoing evangelism emphasis?
Double bingo. Well. And maybe something about leadership and their commitment to that. So all of the above.
Evangelistic churches have evangelistic pastors. Is the staff, is the lead pastor doing the work themselves?
We have a free download for you, and it's actually a sheet that you can self-score. You answer 20 questions, anywhere from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And we come back and we predict what your growth rate is going to be for the next year in worship attendance. It's not a perfect tool, but it's a good tool. There's a link to that for the attendance predictor. Look in the show notes. You'll absolutely love it. That's cool. We'll see you soon.